In this video, I'm going to give you a practical example of theory U, which is leading through listening. Just to set the stage, two little data points. One is when you look at all the leadership failures that we can witness in major organizations and institutions around us, and you double click on that and ask yourself, what is really at the core of that? Almost always, at the core of these leadership failures are leaders disconnecting with the reality around them, which is often significantly changed. In other words, leaders unable to listen to the changed reality around them. So that's one. And the other one is when I look at ULab the last years, when I look at all the different programs and labs and activities that we have been undertaking, and then you talk to participants and the change makers afterwards about what's the most important thing that changed for them. Just about every time you have that conversation, among the top 2 or 3 things is listening, because my level of listen has changed, has deepened. That's what just about everyone says. And so this may sound as something that's really small, right? Okay, so the listening changed, all right. And what else? But if you really double click on that, right? When your listening is shifting, changing, deepening, that means that your relationships to others are shifting, changing, deepening. And that means that your experience of others and of the world is shifting, changing, deepening. And that means everything is changing. So it looks like really small, but the impact on our lives, on our experience, on our relationships, and on the results that emerge from these relationships is profound and significant. So with that, let's look at this chart here. I have studied and observed listening for a number of years. And what I came up with is a really simple distinction between 4 different levels of listening, which I'm going to share with you now. The first level that I call listening 1 really operates based on habits and results to a mode of listening that I call downloading. And what I mean with downloading is that your listening operates based on your habits of thought, your habits of judgment, and your old habits of conversation and action. And it results into reconfirming what you already know, which is reconfirming old opinions and old judgments. Basically, listening 1 is that all you see, all you listen to is limited by what you already know. So it's kind of, if you listen kind of with this instrument here, what you see and what you notice is limited by what's already in here, which is your concepts of the past, your experience of the past. That's limiting you. And obviously, in a normal time, that may be acceptable at times. But if you live in a moment of disruption, and that is the only way you can operate, it is a real problem for all the obvious reasons. So let me visually summarize that level of listening by drawing this circle. And the circle really is meant to be the boundary of our own organization. So for example, my own organization as a listener. So inside the circle is everything I know, right? All my experiences of the past. Listening 1 is that the place from where our listening happens is here in the center. So that means I am in the center of my own prison. So imagine kind of this circle is a closed room. The curtains are down, the doors are closed. You cannot see what's going on outside. All you see is what you project, right? So the slides you project, it's basically your knowledge of the past. That's what you are limited to. And again, so your knowledge may be appropriate or not to a situation, but if you are in a moment of disruption, that knowledge is, bound to be out of date pretty soon. Which brings us to the second level of listening, which is something I call factual listening, and that really is focusing on noticing differences. Noticing what's different, and that way of operating really is based on activating this instrument of knowing, the open mind, and results in seeing something new, connecting with disconfirming data. So disconfirming data means you're not just reconfirming what you already expected to see, but you pick up something new, which of course is the source of innovation. But for all of us who work in real world change initiatives, we know that in today's systems change, in today's organizational change, two more levels of even deeper levels of listening are required. The first of which is something that I call empathic listening. And empathic listening is really has to do with, or is grounded in, activating this instrument of knowing, our open heart, as an organ of perception, as a device, as a sensory organ that allows us to tune into someone else's perspective. And that results in seeing the world through another person's eyes, seeing and sensing the world through another person's eyes. So let me kind of track that visually. So this was, the downloading level one. What's level two? Kind of the factual listening. Level two is this. So that dot is you're no longer in the center of your own prison, but you go to the window, you open the window, and you look what's outside, right? You see what's actually going on outside. You're not going outside, you're still inside, right? So that's kind of called the subject-object awareness, right? You're here, the knower, and you observe something outside of yourself, but you see it as opposed to just projecting your experiences of the past. Now, how is that here on the third level? The moment kind of you engage in an episode of empathic listening, something profound happens, which is the place from where your listening is operating is moving beyond your own boundary and is beginning to operate from the place from where that other person is operating from. So you begin to see the world through that person's eyes. And for example, you can then see yourself from that perspective of another person. So that's really when you track your own experience of empathic listening, the interesting, how would I know whether or not I'm listening on an empathic level? Well, number one, you forget your own agenda. And it's almost like taking a deep dive into another person's perspective. You forget your own view and you tune into someone else's way of seeing and sensing the world. That's something we do quite naturally when we listen to stories, when we listen to other people, but it's also something that often is socialized out of us through professional training or something we call education. That's level 3. Now, what's level 4? Level 4 is something that I call generative listening, which really has to do with connecting with emerging future possibilities. And it works by activating this instrument of knowing, the open will, by which, as I mentioned before, we mean the capacity to letting go and letting come. And the result of this one is connecting to an emerging future possibility and beginning to activate that future potential. So how would I know whether or not I have been operating on the 4th level? 1, your level of energy is much higher. 2, your sense of self, by which I mean how intimate you are connected with who you could be tomorrow, by which I mean your highest future possibility. So that connection to who you are today, connecting to who you could be tomorrow, that's a very critical lifeline for anything creative we want to do. And that sense of connection is strengthened, right? It's not a connection to other people necessarily, it's a connection to ourselves. But it also can relate to other people. So example of this way of operating, of course, is a really good coach. So what does a really good coach do? So if I share, for example, my problems, my challenges, kind of that I'm facing right now, a great coach is not just empathizing with me, right, with all the struggles that I have today, but a great coach is listening to me, paying attention to me from a place that is attending to my highest future possibility, to who I could be tomorrow. And if I receive the gift of someone else listening to me in terms of my highest future possibility, that's the greatest gift I can receive, because it helps me. It eases my own process. It facilitates my own process of stepping into that, of activating, not only sensing, but also activate that highest future possibility. So that's why the level 4 listening is so critical, and it happens interpersonally, right? So for example, a really good coach, but it also happens on the level of organizations or larger systems, or even on the level of countries or beyond. Think about Nelson Mandela, think about Martin Luther King, think about Gandhi and the inspirations. So the way they operated from an emerging future possibility that wasn't quite there yet, but that they connected with in an intimate way, and therefore, for the rest of us, opened a space of possibility. So that's what I mean kind of with this generative listening. And you could, of course, say that generative listening and deep listening, right, to use another word that is summarizing listening level 3 and level 4, right? Deep listening and generative listening has always been critical, right? And that is very true. But from today's perspective, right, living and operating in a moment of disruption like we experience it today, we can also say that it has never been as critical as today. So that's the critical importance of these deeper capacity that are even more critical now than they have been before.